Good day, Demonland fans, Demon fans out there listening. Welcome back to the Stats File Preview podcast. Recording time is Friday morning on a beautiful, beautiful Anzac Eve day. Looking forward to getting to the MCG later on. Just following on from last week, just a slight tweak to the Stats File podcast. We're going to be doing more of a focus on the preview of the upcoming game. I'm going to be aiming to drop it every Friday so you can listen to it ahead of the game. Obviously, tight turnaround tonight, so hopefully we'll get it out this afternoon. Andy's still travelling, and you'll have time to listen to it on the way into the MCG as you drive in, train in, get to the ground. Let's make some noise tonight against the Tigers. So I'll get to the preview of that game. I'm still going to do a wrap up and review of the previous game. I did the Stats File podcast on Monday night with George. The Demonland podcast Monday night with George, where I talked a little bit about the stats. I'll unpack them a little bit more in today, but so about a 50-50 split today in terms of the review and preview. Normally I start with why we won and lost our previous game, then equity points, the three phases of football. I'm going to jump into the equity points in the three phases of football really quickly and just go through some of those notable stats and then return to why we won and lost. It was a really fascinating game from a statistical perspective. And also watching it was obviously a thrilling win over the Lions, but in many ways, a lot of really curious stats, few of which have been unpacked, one in particular that I'll get to. So one of the benefits of doing the show on a Friday is having time to let some of this sort of percolate through, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do it later in the week, as well as focusing more on a preview of the upcoming game. So we've got content on the Monday night on Demonland and Demonland content on the Friday. But also it helps me have time to think through, why, for instance, we lost, what the stats means, and also, of course, pick up some information along the way through various outlets and media and shows and whatnot, and some of which I'm bringing to bear for this show. So without any further ado, I'll jump into, let's have a look at, first of all, our equity points. I talk about this every week. Short version, it's player ratings. Each player gets player ratings and they can earn them. They get that for the impact that they do, and they can earn them in all sorts of different categories. The two biggest categories of how a player earns rating points are ball winning, winning the ball, and then how they use it and how that impacts the game, the scoreboard, what scoreboard impact. And when you aggregate them up, you can get a team-wide score for each of those categories: pre-clearance, post-clearance, basically any of the categories where a player scores. But ball winning and ball use are the two key ones. And this week, ball winning, a big factor in the win, I think, was that we matched them for ball winning and certainly impact. 103.6 equity points across the 23 players for ball winning against their 108.7, given how strong they are in the contest and the sort of players they've got across every line. A differential of 5.1 is very impressive. AFL average for ball winning is 111, so both teams were below that, and that's probably reflected in the really low pressure ratings, which I'll touch on, which was one of the many curious stats I thought in this game. Ball use, though, was a terrific one, 74.1 points to us. AFL average for points teams get for using the ball. Equity points is 48.4 this season. We 74.1 to their 63.7. They're a brilliant kicking team, a differential of 10.4 equity points for how we use the ball compared to them. Is a big factor in why we won this game, absolutely. And ball uses, as I've talked about in previous shows, why I really like these equity points is the other way to look at ball use is kicking efficiency, which we were up in, and I'll talk to that in a sec. But it's a pretty blunt instrument, kicking efficiency, because there's all sorts of reasons why you might have a lower kicking efficiency. Like a mid under pressure, for instance, is going to have a lower kicking efficiency than, for instance, a defender who's chipping the ball around the back half. But ball use in this context is the impact of how teams use the ball, or an individual uses the ball, measured by scoreboard impact. So I think that's a really important, well, for me, I find it really useful because it gives a real sense of the impact of how teams use the ball and individuals. So 74.1 against an AFL average of 48.4 points for how we use the ball. Big factor in our win. And I thought we actually struggled with our turnovers, and I'll get to that. So there's a few. That's just one of the curious stats. So our ball use was good, but our clangers were lower than theirs, but our points from turnover were nuts, which we'll get to. So looking at offence, I should say, that's when we've got clear possession of the ball, obviously, and when we're controlling the ball. And defence is when the opponent has the ball, and contest is when the ball is in neutral and neither team has clear possession. So starting off with defence, as I've said at in the first Stats File pod, I'm leading with this because whilst it's exciting the way we're playing, top four teams who aren't top four, top six in the key defensive stats don't win flags. So in the future, this is something that we're going to need to improve. It's already becoming apparent that it's a struggle for us. So, for instance, we top three for ball movement from the back half in the AFL, bottom three for ball movement, defending ball movement in the AFL. Just in this, some key notable defensive stats in this game. We had 9 tackles inside 50 to their 5. I thought that was a big factor. The other one was we had 50 tackles. They only had 31 tackles for the game. And I think I remember hearing at some point in one of I watched the replay 3 times. So it could have been on the 7 replay I watched or the Fox replay or one of the shows I watched. So I think they only had 7 tackles in the second half lines, which given they had 31, they had 24 in the first half, 7 in the second half. We had 50, 19 more than them. I think that that was a big factor in why we won the game. And again, I'll talk to that at the end of this wrap up. Defensive one-on-one loss. We only lost 14.3% of our one-on-one defensive one-on-one contests. 18 less than them. They lost 18.2, which I did mention in the preview of this game that defensively I was surprised that their numbers weren't as good as I thought they might be in terms of their one-on-one, particularly given they've got Andrews, who was the second highest rated player on the ground, which is incredibly impressive given he's a key defender who plays very deep. And he was obviously a big factor in their intercepts. But so, we did defensively much better one-on-one than I thought we might, particularly given, in the preview I said key to the game would be our ability to stop their tools. And I thought we did a really good job. Logan Morris didn't really get off the chain. Impressive young player, terrific young player, picked 30-odd in the draft. So they got a real winner there. So in terms of territory, I'll come back to this, but overall for the match, it was in our forward half 49% of the time. So 49-51 was the split forward defensive, which is about where we're at. For the season, we're 52-48. So that's about where we're at, and that's where the sort of transition game for most teams is where it's at the moment, particularly when you play 2 teams that are focused on transition, or the 2 teams that are playing are focused on transition. So forward and defensive split was about normal. But what was curious, and I'll come back to this, was the difference. So in the first half, it was 59% in the first quarter in our forward half and 53% in the second half, and 42%. Then it flipped in the third and fourth quarter. It's only 42% of the time in our forward half in the third quarter, and only 43% of the time in our forward half in the fourth quarter. And that's really curious. I'll touch on it again. So in the last 2 quarters, they had it in their forward half of the ground 58% of the time, 57% of the time. That in most circumstances would indicate a hammering, but I think there's some tactical stuff there, which is a factor in why we won. So Jumping to offense, some key offensive stats. I mentioned kicking efficiency. It was 75% kicking efficiency to their 69.2. AFL average is 67.1. So really good kicking efficiency for the day, particularly given we don't kick it around like they do in terms of those short lateral 30, 40, 20, 30 metre kicks. A lot of our kicks are contests, to a contest. So, and we turn the ball over a lot. So given that our kicking efficiency, they scored from turnover a lot, I should say. Our kicking efficiency was pretty impressive. Our disposal efficiency, which includes handballs, obviously, 77 to their 77.1% of the time. Efficiency to 73.7. So both our overall disposal efficiency, handball efficiency, and kicking efficiency was better than them. Despite that, our kick inside forward 50 retention, we only 41.9% of the time we retained it to their 58.1. So they retained it a lot more when they went inside 50. I suppose that's no surprise given their skill level. AFL average is 47.2. Metres gained by hand were, as I predicted, we would be in the preview, back up to our normal level coming off the very low level the previous week against the Bombers. 372 metres gained. 163 to the Lions, who aren't really a handball metres gained team. I think that's above their average. But in many ways, we forced them into a bit more of a handball game than they otherwise would have wanted to, I think. So 372 metres gained. AFL average is 213. I think the Swans are up to some crazy number like 400 or 500 metres gained by hand now, or maybe a high 400. So that I talked about that, the split in the way the game's going. In terms of kicking control or sort of chaos, ball in motion all the time play, that the Swans are leading at the moment, and that we're playing in that model as well. Other defensive other stats in this is defensive half to forward 50%. They actually move the ball better from their back half than us, say 41% of the time with their chains, their transition chains. They moved it from their back half to the forward half. We were only 36.1. Our season average is 33.7, so it's a bit over that. Defensive half to score percentage, they were also better than us in this one. AFL average 13.3, 21.3% of the time they scored from their defensive chains from the back half, which is above AFL average and above ours for the game, which was 16.7. In terms of, so this was offense, not defense I'm talking about here. So in terms of score sources, this is really interesting. So there's a measure, Champion Data measure for expected chain score. So scores that you might expect that would be the expected score from a particular chain, and it's based on the origin of a team's chain, including clearance, turnovers, and kicks. How does it start? Where does it start on the ground? So this was interesting, I thought, from stoppages. The chain score, our expected chain score, so our expected score from possession chains from stoppages was 13.1, but we scored 39 points. So that was a big factor in that. So we really did well from scoring from stoppages when we did win our stoppages. Similarly, turnover, our expected chain score from on turnover after we won a turnover, so the chaining up after that point was 39, but yet we scored 57 points. So for both stoppages and turnover, we really were very effective in terms of scoring, taking our opportunities to score from stoppages and turnover. The stoppage score differential was really notable because we had two more around the ground clearances than us, so we did really well in that in that respect. They, on the other hand, in terms of their chain score, this was amazing, and this I'll come back. This is one of the things I wanted to explore in the review of the game. They scored on turnover. The expected chain score for them from their turnovers was 48 points, yet they scored 80 points. So they were unbelievable. 80 of their 102 points came from turnover. Extraordinary number, given the fact we won. Extraordinary number anyway. That is a huge number to be giving up on turnover, and and this is one of the things I wanted to touch on in why we lost. Why we won, I should say, or how they lost. But on turnover, they really went to town when they did win a turnover. They were brutally effective on punishing us on it, which was the point I was long-windedly trying to get to. So in terms of where the scoring chain started, this was also interesting and talks about the game plan that I'll talk about in terms of the way we're playing and swarming. And in this game, the game was played behind the arcs. I watched the game from the Ponsford stand, the first time I've watched us play from the Ponsford stand this year, from behind the goals. And you could really see, I just love it in terms of the setup and the structures, and you could really see how we were allowing them to move the ball, with those lateral kicks. We're giving them up until about the logos when we were pressed up, squashed up into that area between the two arcs. And I think that's reflected in this number, or these two numbers. Our chain start region, so where our scoring began, the point at which it began, defensive midfield, 31 points. We're averaging 21.7 this season from that area. 31 of our 104 points were from the defensive midfield, began in the defensive midfield, 44 from the attacking midfield, and that's either side of the centre circle, basically. So 75 points of our 104 points in total began in the defensive or attacking midfield, or in total the midfield, which really shows that that sort of that the game was played between the arcs, and I think we engineered that way. Points from defensive half, 52. Our season average is 40, so that was pretty good from that perspective. Moved it well from the back half. They did better, which was not really their go. It's one of our strengths, and I wonder whether this is partly how we set up the ground and our tactics, but they had 58 points from their back half. We're averaging 44 points against in the opponents we've played, so it was above the other teams we've played, but they actually scored more from the back half. In the contest, notable contest stats, contested possessions I mentioned would be a big key in the preview, our ability to match them for the contest. We did pretty much. They had two more than us, 117, 119. They had 8 more ground ball gets. Points were even, or number of pre-clearance contested possessions were 75 each. Post clearance were -3. They had one. We had one more contested mark than them, which is really notable given their aerial strength. I thought foot going out was a big factor actually in this match. Wasn't spoke about much, but they, given their aerial strength, and they've not just their talls like Logan Morris, their mid-size utilities, as I spoke about in the preview last week, are all really good above their head. So for us to take one more contested mark than them is really notable. Just on contested marks, they're hard to clunk in AFL footy in these days. AFL average for contested marks per game is only 8.7. So, that's it. It's no easy thing to be taking contested marks the way footy is being played in 2026. So, in terms of clearance numbers, interesting. I mentioned this would be a big key. We needed to leverage this. We've really sort of very poor down the bottom, sort of third of the ladder in terms of most of these numbers for clearances, send clearances, stoppage clearances, and scores from clearances. It's been a weakness of ours, much discussed. Are we relying too much on scoring from the back half? We're number 1 in the AFL, as I mentioned, at the top for maybe number 3 for ball movement from the back half, but we're bottom 3 for defending ball movement from the back half. But we're only down total 5 in totals for down 5 clearances. We had 3 less centre clearances. We had 2 less stoppage clearances. However, we got first possession 4 more times than then, 33 to 37. Unfortunately, they were able to convert their first possession to a clearance 81.8% of the time against the AFL average of 74. So they were really effective at getting a first possession after winning a clearance, and we were 70.3% of the time. So they bested us in that one. Excluding our rucks, this has been really interesting. This changed the centre bounce attendances. I mentioned in the Freo game that centre bounce attendances were 11 in that game. It was 4-4, I think maybe 5 last week for the previous week against the Suns, and it was 5 this week, excluding our rucks with centre bounce attendances. Jack Steele had 28, Tommy Sparrow had 28, Cozzy Pickett had 27, Caleb Windsor had 17, and Jai Cully had 5. I flagged a little while ago. I thought that he might be in the centre a bit more often, and I thought he was impressive in this game. Just a notable thing about the rucks, Max Heath, he did all right. He had 8 hit outs, 3 of which were to advantage, which is pretty good. Maxi had 23 hit outs, 6 to advantage. Pressure was really notable, really low pressure numbers. Fagan, who had all the data, it was fascinating to hear him off the top of his head know all of the key data points in this game, one of which was he mentioned their pressure rating was 1.5. He mentioned that's how they view it at the AFL clubs. It's not it's rounded up, not rounded up. It's made into a larger number for TV for the pressure rating, but it was 157, 156 for the game. The big quarter was 157 to 136 in the third quarter, which is really where, they would have been furious with that. I would have thought that how flat they came out after halftime. When I say they, the Lions. Our top 5 pressure players were Jack Steele, Cozzy Pickett, Jai Cully, Caleb Windsor, and Tom Sparrow. All right, well, this is going longer than I thought it meant to, but that's probably no surprise. So why did we win the game? How did they lose? It's really hard to tell in some respects. I'm not sure. In many ways, they were... all of the stats were pretty even, and they bested us in some of the stats that we would have hoped to win. Scores from the back half, for instance. We had the unexpected score. But I'll start again. In many ways, we were lucky to win this game. So expected score was 88.1 to us to 98.2 to them. So the actual score was 104, obviously, to 102. So we lose that game by 10 points on expected score. The other reason why it's amazing that we won this game is that we conceded 80 points, as I mentioned before, on turnover. That is unbelievable. We're averaging 54.7 points against us on turnover this season. So to give up 80 is unbelievable. It's a huge number. And I wonder, though, whether it's part of the... I just don't know, actually. It's a really curious number, but I do wonder whether it's somewhat influenced by the tactics King employed in this match. Just to sort of give a sense of how unusual that is. 80 points. We've only conceded 80 points on turnover 7 times since 2017, twice last year against Freo, and that's when they just thrashed us in both games, where they opened us up and ran in waves and basically played the way we're playing this year against us last year, and we just could not run and spread and defend on turnover against Freo. But the other games back in 2019, Geelong, St Kilda in 2019, West Coast in 2018, actually Brisbane last year as well. Brisbane in this game, I should say. So, and St Kilda back in 2000. So including this game, we've only conceded 80 points on turnover 7 times since 2017. And excluding this game, we didn't win any of the other 6. So we've never won a game. And I would imagine that hardly any teams ever win a game giving up 80 points. What was interesting with that, as I mentioned in the Demonland pod, we had 8 less clangers than them. So we had 48, they had 56. Notable given their sort of the difference in the team's kicking skills. The AFL average for clangers is 57.9. So they were just a touch under the AFL average, and we're well under the AFL average. And that was definitely a big factor in the win, I think. We had 20, you're missing an easy shot, by the way, that's a clanger. So we kicked 12 straight from set shots, which helps explain the expected score, and it helps explain why we had so few clangers, because you miss an easy one from 30 metres out directly in front. That's a clanger. But given we had fewer clangers than them, so they were, it's really curious. They scored 80 points on turnover. That's, they're 2 anomalous stats. So how did we win? I thought one of the notable stats that I did here during the week was they're the fastest. We're the fastest team in the AFL this year from playing on after a mark or free. That's measured by how long the ball was in the hand of the person who's got the mark or free. For context, we were second for this last year, but what we are better at is moving the ball. But so we're number one clearly for playing on. But after half time, we moved the ball slower than any other team for the round after a mark or free. So we clearly changed our tactics at half time to slow the game down. And I think that the other big tactical change, so there were a couple, I think, was we wanted to keep this contest out of we wanted to keep this game out of contest. That's clear. We were allowing them to have that chipping around the back half. I think that was a tactical, a part of their tactics. As I said, not to press up on them until they got to the logo. Let them have those kicks around the half-back flank. Normally, the rule of thumb for Lions over the last few years is if they get to 100 uncontested marks, they win games. I think they had 129 in this game. It was something like 80 or something at halftime. So we definitely improved in the second half in that sense, but we were allowing them just to have those kicks in the back D50, for instance. It was not until they got up to the wings where we started pressing up on them and making it really difficult for the receiver of the kick or for them to find that lead up target. And this was sort of reflected in that time in forward half I mentioned before. So it completely swung around. We only had 42% and 43% in the third and fourth quarters in our forward half. So we were allowing them, I think, to hold the ball. That's a really unusual sort of split in terms of they were pressing and we defended hard, and I think part of that is how we played. So looking at the split in the game, down 17 points at half time, Wheelo, who puts the great thread on Demonland, StatsFile thread 2026, has started putting the quarter by quarter differentials. This was really interesting. So I'm going to quickly run through them. The key differentials, which helps explain our dominant second quarter or help put some meat on the bone in terms of what we did tactically. We had minus 24 disposals in the first quarter, but plus 8 in the second, minus 1, plus 4. So we improved after quarter time. We clearly let them have fewer disposals after quarter time. Contested possessions were, as I said, even for much of the game. Uncontested possessions, minus 28 in the first quarter, but after that it improved. We were plus 5, minus 2, minus 4. So after the quarter time, we clearly made some adjustments from that perspective. Same reflected in this stat. And well, for marks, we were minus 22 for marks in the first quarter. All of that chipping around, that reduced to minus 13 in the second. We were minus 3 in the third, minus 19 in the last. Again, I think we were allowing a lot of those kicks in the back half. The clearance, the inside 50s were plus 2 first quarter, plus 2 second quarter, minus 2 third, and dead even in the last. So the other one in terms of, I think the quarter by quarter breakdown that was interesting was our ball use. So first quarter, we were minus 2.7 points for how we used the ball. Second quarter, we were minus 14.5. And then after half time, whether this was tactical or we just lifted our game, after half time, it completely changed. So in the third quarter, we were plus 23.8 equity points for how we used the ball. So we were much, much more impactful than we had been and than them. And we were in the third quarter. In the last, we were plus 3.8 for how we used the ball. Funnily enough, in terms of winning the ball, we were plus 5.8 in the first quarter, but then after that, they won the ball better than us. So I think tactically he had another really good game. King, clearly we did that was a big change. We slowed the game down in terms of how quickly we played on after a mark after half time. I think part of that was to stop feeding their turnovers. I don't know what the split on turnovers was in terms of up to halftime than after halftime, but I'm guessing they looked at the numbers and it was nuts at halftime, and part of that was I guess part of the strategy of slowing down after a mark or free kick was to reduce the amount of times we turned the ball over and they could hurt us on it, because we had to do something. And it also, I think, kept the game out of being a stoppage game, for which there is a real strength of theirs. So I think it was really clever coaching, was why we won. At the end of the day, the key reason we won was our accuracy. As I said, we kicked 12 goals straight from set shots, and that, it's the most overlooked stat in footy, the most important one, accuracy. Melbourne fans know it. After 3-4 years in a row of how many games did we win on expected score and lose on the actual scoreboard, and this was the opposite in this game. So, yeah, a really interesting game, and I'm still not fully sort of across whether that 80 points on turnover is why it's such an anomaly, and whether that King's tactics played a role in it. I will note, as I said before, though, that a factor in that was that they really, their expected chain score from turnovers was 48, I think I said. So they really were very effective once they did win a turnover at punishing us. Great win, terrific game. So let's move on to the preview for this game. We've had a run at the Dogs in that in the game that was shortened up at Ballarat with the Lightning. So we've got a sense of how we match up against them. Just running through some of the key numbers in terms of the ins. CJ comes in. Harrison Petty goes out with injury. There's still sort of a lack of information about what that injury was. I want to hear something from the club on that pretty soon, hopefully. They lose. They've just been decimated by injuries. Again, they were on the weekend. Tim Taranto out with concussion. Sam Banks out. Maurice Rioli, I think he did his hammy. And so in for them is Jacob Hopper, Tom Brown, Tom Lynch, Sam Cumming for his AFL debut, Tom Burton for his AFL debut. We match up super well against them. It's a bit hard to tell what their game style is, because they really don't have any sort of statistical high ratings. They're 17th in contested possessions per game. They're 17th in uncontested possessions per game. They're 17th in effective disposals per game. They're 14th in contested marks per game. They're 14th in marks per inside 50. They're 13th in centre clearances. They're 15th in stoppage clearances. They're 18th in score involvements per game. 18th in metres gained per game. You get the drill there. Pretty much bottom three for almost every key stat. In the last couple of years, the way under Uze, they're also wanting to play a run and gun style, definitely still wanting to win the contest. But one, they've had a horror run with injury, so it's really difficult. Injury's still by far the biggest factor in football. You can't, any team you take out a player, for instance, Tim Taranto's been their best clearance player. They're already bottom of the AFL list in terms of clearances total and scoring from, you take out your best clearance player, you're gonna struggle. We, on the other hand, we've got what I'm really enjoying about this year is a clearly identifiable style. Although, as we've starting to discover, King is tinkering with that style much more than what I think people might have thought. Where the sort of thinking at the beginning of the season is we'll just play one way and bed that down. I think that's not actually been the case, where there's an overarching template the way we want to play, but he's shown real tactical versatility, which I touched on in the reason why we won that game against the Lions. Similarly against the Suns, he looks like he's a coach that, more than Goody, for instance, has a focus on mitigating the opposition strengths. In this game, I think what we'll do is go to our A game and look to run them off the park. I think we've got to point out, it was really funny actually with the ins and outs. He's not averse to playing the old sort of ducks and drakes. Maybe it's all that time down at the Cattery, but he did seem to imply, meaning King, did seem to imply during the week that we might see some changes given the 5-day turnaround, which is a big factor in this game. But in the end, they only had the one turnover and they didn't bring in at all for Harrison Petty. Adams was one of the emergencies, instead bringing CJ back in. And I think that shows us, which I think is a great move, I half expected to see Paddy Cross come in for the same reason. And so I think that what we'll see is us playing a really, really big run and gun style and really look to punish them and stretch their defensive capability, but in particular stretch their ability to run and cover. Now, we've been in this position last year when we're clearly not as fit as opposition, and the big one in the two Freo games, as I mentioned, we gave up 80-plus points in both of those games on turnover, and that's as much as about anything as our inability to defend turnover as it is giving the ball to them in to making clangers to make mistakes. There's a bazillion mistakes in every game. It's a mistake-ridden sport, and it's about how you punish. Freo were able to punish us last year because we could not defend them when they spread on turnover, and I suspect the Tigers won't be able to either. It's not just the quality when you take out players like Tim Taranto and Maurice Rioli and those sorts of players. It's also, and the raft of other senior players they've got out, they're also the fittest, strongest players. So, you've got someone like Tom Burton and Sam Cumming playing their first AFL games. We know they're not going to be up to AFL standard sort of elite fitness the way the senior players are. So I think we'll look to exploit that, get them on the outside, run. I think we'll really push up. We'll really look to take the game on. We won't be worried too much about giving up scores on turnover. They're 18th for exploiting scores from turnover. Just in terms of just quickly the lineups, average age is 25 for them, 25.2. Average matches is 81.8 to 84.8, which is curious given, their injuries. Average goal is 60, 45, I don't know if it's over even what the average goal is on for that. So in terms of team stats, they're obviously on the bottom of the ladder. They're 53.6, 6 losses. So they're struggling to score. Obviously, it goes without saying. The weather, perfect. It's going to be a bit overcast, so hopefully we won't get too much of that sort of dew that rolls in the MCG at night. A little bit of overcast means it won't get too cold either. So perfect weather conditions. In terms of the betting, the betting is, what is it? So we are, let's have a look, 6.05 they are to win. We're $1.13. So, be careful, obviously, expecting us to win just because we're that Essendon is a good lesson for that. But I do think we'll win. If you were to have a bet, the only bet I would look at in this game is over the line. 38.5 is the line. Curiously, you can you can back the D's to win by more than 40 and get $1.86 for that bet, or you can take the line at 38 points and get $1.90. So I'd be doing that. I actually think we'll win this game by 50 points plus for much of the reason that I said before. Quickly, in terms of the stats, in terms of the key stats, we beat them in everything except for the defensive 50 to forward 50. In terms of defending that. So defending the ball movement is their only sort of key statistical area they match us in. Time in forward half is 47 to 51. Contested possessions, they're minus 12.7 differential for contested possessions. We're minus 6.8. They're minus 2.2 for clearances. We're minus 0.13 in attack. We're averaging 95.2 a game. They're 58.7. Jeez, that's terrible. Points from turnover, they're only scoring 38 points from turnover. We're scoring 53. Points from stoppages, 36.3 to 17. Chain percentage chain to score percentage is 17 to 21. D50 to forward 50 percentage, moving the ball from the back half. They only do it 17% of the time. We do it 26.1% of the time. Inside 50s, 57 to 48. Shots at goals, 26.8 to 20.5. This is all AFL averages this season in the 6 games thus far. Scores for inside 50, 42.7 of the time, percent of the time we score when we go inside 50, they're only at 38.6. On defence, they're giving up 109.5 points a game. We're giving up 101 points a game, and that isn't going to get it done. There's been a bit of talk about that. I'm happy enough at the moment for the way we're playing, but certainly if we're going to be a contender next year, for instance, in terms of being a top 4 contender, whenever that might be, we have to get that down to 85, 90. You can't be giving up 100 points a game and expect to win. Points from turnover, defending points from turnover, we're giving up 54.7. This is a big one. They're giving up 60.8. So they're averaging 60.8 per game. And I expect, here's my tip for this game, points from turnover, I wouldn't mind betting you will get them on 70, 80 for this, because we'll look to absolutely exploit them and go when we turn the ball over. In terms of points from stoppage, they're giving up 45.7 from stoppages. We're 41.8, which is still a bit low actually too many for us. The inside 50s 52. The opposition are having 52 against us. They're 54 against them. So, for all the sort of key statistical areas, we've got them covered. Also think that, we're much closer to our best 23, obviously. A horror run with injuries for the Tigers. I feel really bad for Uze. I don't have any sort of animus towards the Tigers as a footy team. And you don't want to see teams struggle. But the bottom line is, as I've talked about, over the journey on the podcasts and on Demonland, is that footy injury is by far the key determinant in success, and they've been smashed. So, of course, if you don't bring AFL intensity, as we saw against Essendon in Adelaide in the gather round, you're going to struggle if the opposition does. Anything can happen. However, I really can't see that happening. I think that, as I mentioned in the podcast last week, I think that we set ourselves for the last week's game and this game as a double, and I think that helps explain our lethargy, as King called it, in that the post-match presser from the Essendon game. I think that a big factor is you can't be up for every week, and we've timed our high performance planning to be up for these 2 weeks. We had 40,000 people at the G last week, which no one commented on the media. That for a Sunday 3:15 game, that is a big crowd for the D's playing a interstate team, albeit a Brisbane, who are of course Fitzroy. That's plus 40,000 is a great crowd. No one seemed to pump Melbourne up. We don't get any credit for it. It was such a great atmosphere. And I think Wera has got a real eye on these marquee games. And so this is another one. So obviously, collectively as a team, we want to be playing our very best footy on these games. Not coincidentally, both games are free to air. This is our only Friday night game of the year, so we'll be well primed to play. I think that the one change is also indicated that we're pretty happy. King's pretty happy with the lineup. I really like the only one change because it's important to reward such a fantastic victory last week. Looking forward to tonight. Cannot wait. At time of recording, the moment's 10:28. Andy, who is in transit today back from his overseas jaunt, really looking forward to having him back on the podcast next week for the Demonland podcast. So I'm looking forward to this game. I'm looking forward to getting to the MCG. I'm expecting us to really give them a good touch-up, 50-point plus win. And let's all get out there. Let's support the Ds and let's have another good win tonight. Go Red Leggers!